Hello, I'm Noah Waldeck from Subjectively Objective, and today we're going to be talking about Todd Hido's latest book, The End Sends Advance Warning. Looking at the cover here, you can see it's an image that's been offset printed onto linen, and so it has a very soft touch type of quality. It actually makes for a little bit of a fragile book, and you can see it has a relatively low Dmax, and so it gives the image kind of a soft, moody quality. You can also see that there's been a title that's foiled onto the cover in sort of a salmon color. Now, something interesting to note about this project is it's actually a continuation of sorts from his previous book, Bright Black World. In fact, the title is actually taken from the essay to that book. It's also interesting to note that these two projects are the first ones that he's ever shot outside of the US. Looking here now, the first thing you encounter is this little vellum booklet. And in the context of the book, you don't necessarily really have any information about what it's about. But listening and reading interviews with Todd, you find out that these are actually images of him and his wife's family. And so, although it is a little bit of a non sequitur in the context of the book, it's not really connected. It does give you a certain kind of nostalgic mood that kind of sets off your mind as you start to look at the rest of the book. Now, Todd had mentioned that after his mid-career aperture survey, Intimate Distance, he'd had a change of heart about only photographing in America. He said he used to feel like his work was only meant to be done in places that reminded of him home, but for this project, he wanted to move to places that were new and unfamiliar to him. You also see the end papers here are almost a little bit of a metallic kind of bronze color. So here we have a title page. And then we get to our very first image in the book here, which this one was taken in Hawaii. I saw on Instagram he gave a little shout out to Jason Momoa for taking to him this place. I guess they're good friends. And apparently Jason Momoa is also the one who introduced him to Leica, which is what he's been using for this book. He used two different digital Leicas, an S3 medium format and an SL2 full frame one. This is from the full frame here. There's a little dedication for the book. This book is dedicated to Larry Salton, who taught me that I could walk up to sentimentality, but not become it. Here, when we get to the second page of the book, the first page here, I feel like this is a perfectly nice image. It grabs you. It's a little bit more, it's not the boldest image in here. There's a little bit of subtleness to it. Here, however, though, I feel like this is maybe a little bit of a letdown for the second image to get to in the book. This definitely feels like it's on, it's pretty dark, it's quite subtle. And then we also get the beginning of these little tipped in images that we'll see. We'll also see some that are bound in, but Todd talks about these as being specially inserted little motifs that are either echoes or remembrances of the past, something that maybe gives you an inkling of something that may have happened there prior, or maybe it's like a daydream of the future. Some of them that we'll see later in the book, I think, work quite well. This one, particularly starting off, feels maybe a little bit disconnected visually, at least, with this kind of sepia-toned, older black and white image here with this. I think what he was going for is that this looks like it's actually an image of a beach at night, and here's some seagulls, so maybe these are meant to be a remembrance of seagulls past. But again, I'm not sure that this one's really working, and I definitely don't really dig its placement in the book. I feel like it kind of throws me off right from the beginning. Here, though, going to this image, I feel like we start off on a really strong note here. This actually would have been a great opening image, in my opinion. It's really bold and grabs you. I always personally like to start a book with one that really draws you in and like starts you off on a really high note. So to me, this would have been a really great opening itself. But the way the flash is working with the falling snow and kind of reminiscent of a Lars Thunborg type style, I feel like works really strongly. Here, when we get to this spread, I think these are a nice complement to each other. There's quite a bit of distance between them. There's a lot of space for you as the viewer to draw connection between these two things because they're not directly related to each other. They're not repeating each other. This one on the left here definitely has a really classic kind of Todd Hido feel. This is something to note as it being a very large book. Sometimes, because even the way that binding equipment works, a lot of times larger books might have to be more done by hand, or they might have to use different binding equipment than publishers or printers are usually using. And unfortunately, in this copy of the book, you can actually see here that this page is a little bit misfolded due to probably it being really large and the page is folded. So sometimes by making a really large book, you will run into more quality control issues that you don't always run into elsewhere. Now here we actually see that this first part of the book was all really more of a prelude to the rest of the book. We actually get a second title page here, and then we kind of launch into the full body of the book. Now this image here, Todd has said that he often will revisit places that he's photographed before. So this is actually the exact same location for the cover of his roaming book, except this one's at night, that was during the day. They're almost kind of reverse images of each other, where the tree was the darker area in that one. In this case, the tree's kind of popping out against the dark sky. So quite a striking image. One thing I do want to note here, though, when it comes to actual book design and production, this book has very, very small margins around really large size images. And you can see that it looks like they're meant to be maybe almost slightly less than 1/4 inch of margin is what's intended. But you can see here, this page was actually trimmed a little bit crookedly. And so you're down to actually like an 1/8 inch margin on the bottom there. And you actually have a little bit extra margin on the top. And so that definitely is not something that was intended on purpose. That's more of a production thing that you run into. And as a designer, something you need to be aware of and think about is that you may like a design having really small margins, but getting your book printed or even a magazine printed, it is really more of a commercial industrial process. It's not like making fine art prints, and things like your trim will sometimes be a little bit off. So if you don't want to have an issue like this happening, using larger margins, if you had like 1 inch or even 3/4 of an inch, being an 1/8 inch off would not be super noticeable. But in this instance, it definitely is a little bit noticeable. So that's the trade-off that the Todd Hido and an Israeli press who published the book are making in this instance. They knew that might have happened, and I guess they were okay with it. We have a nice little sequence here where they're all feeling like they're different enough images. They feel like they're the next image surprises you. You don't feel like you're seeing exactly the same thing. Now, compared to the first Tipton image we have, this one is sewn into the binding. And I also feel like there's a lot more connection I'm able to draw between this and the photograph on the page versus the first one that felt a little out of context. These ones feel like they're definitely talking to each other and have something to say. Looking at the margins, you can see that the gutter is the same size as the edges of the page. Later on, though, we'll see that's not always the case. Looking through this book, my impression of it is definitely that it's very much in the tradition of Todd Hido's previous books like Roaming, A Road Divided, or even his previous book that he made right before this one, Bright Black World. So if you are a fan of those books, this book definitely feels like it's in the same vein. Here we get to a part of the book that I would say, personally, it would have been a little bit stronger of a book had you not paired these images together, and actually maybe even if these images had been cut. Both of them are really very much silhouetted, and seeing them together at first glance, they almost feel like you're looking at the same thing, the way the kind of the brightness of the sky is in the center. I don't really feel like they have much room to talk between each other. It just feels kind of like two different versions of the same thing, same lighting condition. One of them's fallen over trees, one of them's some houses and trees and a power line pole, but you don't really feel like you get much difference between them. So I think it would have been stronger to either pair them differently or maybe even cut both of them. This one, we get another bound-in image here This little Instamatic photograph, it does kind of mirror the sun here, but I really do feel like there's more of a connection here. Feels more visually interesting. Feels like they have a way to talk to each other. This one on the left here definitely feels like a very classic Hido type image, and it's almost kind of a combination of the roaming work where he's shooting through the car window, but it also has, you know, the house element is a little house hunting reminiscent there as well. I think that's a nice pair too. Here's actually the image that we see again from the cover. This, I think, is a very strong, dynamic image. Definitely, it's one of the images that's been used to promote the book online. It definitely grabs your attention. Something kind of interesting happens here is when you flip over to the other side, you actually get a kind of a mirrored image looking down the road the other way. Sometimes I might feel doing something like that could end up being a little repetitive or a little bit boring or a little bit expected. I actually do, in this instance, quite like how it works. Because of the physicality of turning it, it almost feels like turning your body around 180 degrees and looking down the road the other way. So I think that's kind of a fun little detail. Here at this point in the book, we get another photograph of a house. And obviously houses have been something that Todd Hido has photographed pretty much continually throughout his career. His first book being House Hunting, the work that he really gets known for. So photograph of a house at night, but it's a very different type of house than we've seen from him generally in the past. This one is, you know, dilapidated and literally the wood of it's falling off, much different from the suburban looking houses that have been kind of the thing he usually is gravitated towards. So similar subject, but a new approach to it. Here we also get a poem from Emily Dickinson that's included as a kind of a companion to this. It says, "I tried to think a lonelier thing than any I had seen, some polar expectation, an omen in the bone of death's tremendous nearness." So a little bit of a dark poem here to go with this kind of dark and moody image. Again, here we're getting another images paired, two different aspect ratios or formats, one being vertical. So there obviously is a scale difference. But I think they're paired well. I feel like these have something to say to each other and allows me as the viewer to draw some type of connection between them, which I think is nice. Okay, here we're getting another sewn in image, and this one is actually has multiple images here. I really like this first one, Sleep by the Sea, this little Instamatic photo, along with this one in the background. This is actually one of the more urban images in here. You can actually see the city of San Francisco in the background, kind of across the bay in this kind of desolate parking lot. I also really like how it works with this photograph of a painting of kind of a seascape along with the beach there. These two in the middle, I feel less sure about these ones, particularly this one on the right here. As we'll see, so far this is the only figure we've seen in the book, and so maybe a little bit different context than we're getting elsewhere, maybe a little bit of something that feels slightly out there. Although I will say that's something that Todd Hido has definitely explored to a much further degree, particularly in his book, Excerpts from a Silver Meadow. He did that type of thing a lot. And he only does it to a small degree here, where he really went full out with basically bringing any type of random image he wanted to into that book. Here we get a real nice image that's a little bit more an industrialized kind of version of the roaming through the windshield type image. Again, this part of the sequence we get into too, we are getting some more of these, again, these kind of roaming ones, but they're also getting a little bit of that house hunting or outskirts, places at night mixed in there as well. So overall, I really think this book, you get very much the feeling of it is kind of a compilation of he's going back to things he's photographed many times before, but he's maybe combining them in some slightly different ways than he's done in the past. Here we have another sewn in image. These ones are palette-wise maybe a little bit different. They don't necessarily feel like they're totally connected that way, but conceptually I definitely can see them. I actually think this one of the flag here is nicest with this image as far as drawing a connection, personally. Here you have an image that I think is a very good example of one that's very dark and moody. You have a lot of black negative space within the book, but at the same time, you have enough of those clouds coming through. You even have the reflections in the water on the road there. You have the little glow from this street light that's making it something. And you also have the way the power lines are interacting with the water on the windshield that definitely gives a mood to it. And the fact that it's dark feels like it's part of that mood. With these 4:3 aspect ratio images, you have plenty of space between the image and the gutter. However, with the 3:2 aspect ratio images, sometimes the gutter ends up being smaller than the rest of the margins due to the way the book is trimmed or bound. You also, though, have images like this, which some might call it kind of a subtle image. I also think you might even just call it kind of a straight up boring image. It really doesn't have a lot going on here. It's all just silhouetted trees. And I really don't feel like, compared to how strong some of these other images is, this feels like a much weaker image. I think the book would have benefited from it just being cut. I don't really feel like it's adding anything to the book as a whole. But again, here you follow it up with one that's very bold, kind of a minimalist image. But again, the way that the flash with the falling snow, it's really, really capturing something quite striking. This is also the beginning of a nice part of a sequence, moving from that to a very house hunting style image, to kind of another house hunting style image and a roaming style one. They're all surprising. This feels like a nice pair. It doesn't feel like you're exactly seeing the same things, but we are in a little bit of a streak of ones that are maybe a little more house oriented than a lot of the book is, which is more, empty landscapes. Here we have another tipped in image along with more of a classic house hunting style one of this trailer, but they actually, I think this one works quite well. It's weird, but I definitely feel like there's, space for the viewer to draw a connection between this little Instamatic photo of, I don't know if that's a stuffed bear or what that is, but along with this, I feel like there is that space and you're able to make those connections. Here again is a very kind of classic house hunting style one with that red light. And then here we get to my very favorite pairing of the entire book. I really like how this tipped in image of the balloons feels like there's a lot of space, but there's also some little parts that are mirrored with this image. You can kind of see the circular shapes here are repeated with the little flares around the lights. There's a nice, both similar palette, but also a kind of a complementary contrast going on. And so I really like this one. It's a little bit weird and out there, but in a very fun way that I find kind of delightful. And so if all of these were as good as this one, I feel like the book would be even stronger than it is right now if all of the pairs and the little kind of tipped in or sewed in images worked as well as this one does. As I'd previously mentioned, he photographed more outside of the continental United States for this project, in places including Iceland, the North Sea of Japan, the Hawaiian Islands, the shores of the Bering Sea, and the Nordic fjords above the Arctic Circle. Again, we're getting into a stretch now. Again, more empty landscapes and roads and looking through the windshield. This pair, I think, works okay. There's some similarities, but there's also enough contrast that I feel like gives me some space as the viewer to think about them. Now, as a sequencing point, I will say here just came to a spot in the sequencing that I would say I personally don't really like how this works. I feel like this image here going into this, they're both wintry landscapes. They have a really similar palette. I don't feel like I was surprised by this transition. I feel like I'm almost kind of like, oh, now I'm seeing more something that's really similar. And there are a lot of spots in the book where we have much more dynamic transitions. So that just feels a little too similar. I really like that as an image though. Now this, starting this sequence, going from here now into this darker one of a house, now into this one, which I feel like is a particularly strong image by itself. Like, I feel like that's a really nice part of sequencing. It's very dynamic. I'm not expecting what's coming next, but I'm really enjoying it. And then here we get to something which we haven't seen at all in the book previously. And I do think it is visually striking and works nicely on its own. It really functions more as a diptych. these aren't really so much paired images. It really feels like they're meant to be seen as one image just in two frames next to each other. The problem I have with it is that we don't see anything else like this in the book at all. Nothing with this type of super glowy color palette, but also no other diptychs. We don't do that in the book. We have pairs, but we don't have other diptychs. So that does feel kind of like an outlier. I'm okay with it being in here. I think I would have liked it better if he had done it again, so it wasn't something we only see one time. Here we have another one. We have a Robert Creeley poem with this one. One day after another, perfect. They all fit. So this one I definitely can see. And actually, this is a rare appearance of a figure, but not in the same way as the other figures. This is really just more of a silhouetted figure in the distance. This one's quite striking with the way the falling snow is. It's very bold over on this side of the image, but also quite subtle over here. But I feel like it draws you in, but then lets you move around. Definitely a nice kind of classic feeling one. This one has also a super classic roaming through the windshield aesthetic. Again, here, these feel like a nice pair. I feel like there's enough distance between them that you can really make connections. This I'm less sure about. So here we get into a sequence where now it almost seems like here was a mountain, and now it's like, okay, we've gotten closer to the mountains. They have a really similar feel to them. Again, I don't know if that has the dynamism that some of the other parts of the book have, so that maybe makes it a little bit more of a weak point for me. And it's not like we even continue that mountain theme. Now we move on to something else here. This is certainly a striking one with the graphicness of these birds flying in the field and the softness coming through the window. Here's another pair we get to that I think would have been stronger if it was paired differently. I actually think they're both nice images in their own right, but they are quite similar feeling that I don't really know that one of them is telling a different story than the other one is, or a different enough story that I want to see them together. I feel like both of them would be fine on their own, or even paired with something that was a little more dynamic. These feel a little bit samey, and I don't feel like they're the strongest possible pairing of these images. Here you get another one where we have a couple of different tipped-in images, a little more salon style there. This one actually, interesting little side note, I featured a photograph of this same apartment building with that tree in the survey book I published, Observations in the Ordinary, so that immediately came to mind when I saw that. Speaking about this project, Hido said, "It's not my job to create meaning, but to charge the air so that meaning can occur." I feel like that's a pretty good summation of his work in general, and particularly the work in this project. And then we get something here which we've not seen at all before in the book. We have a full page image of a figure here from mostly from behind. And then we also have a tipped in image that folds out where we have these kind of iterative images of a rose bush, although I do particularly like this one of the fence. And then on the back here, we have one that's actually like an image that looks like it's a folder or something like that with like a poem taped onto it. It almost looks more like a scan. I like this tipped in piece. I think it's interesting. I kind of wish we'd seen more of things like that in the book, because right now it is something we're only seeing this one time. And then also, I like this as a photograph too, although it does have a different feeling than some of the other ones. In the past, Todd Hido has definitely included more mixes of portraiture along with his landscapes and night work. In this instance, this is the only time that we're seeing this in the book, and we're not going to see it again because this is the very last image that we're getting to. So this feels like, again, kind of going back to where we started in the book, a similar feeling to that. So although I like this in its own right, I don't really feel like it works well in the book. Maybe if he included more portraiture, again, it would feel like then it was more of a reoccurring motif. But right now, it just feels kind of like out of left field. We do two different things we've never done before. and then the book's over. So I feel like the book would have probably have been stronger without even including this spread at all. And here's the last image in the book. We get a pretty extensive credits page, and then we have the back of the book again, a different image here. This was the one with this very subtle figure on the back cover of the book. So that was the End Sends Advance Warning. So the question is this a book you should buy? Well, it's a fairly expensive book at $85. However, it's also a very large book at 17 by 14 inches. So it's not necessarily a bad deal for the amount of book you're getting for the money. It's definitely not as tight and concise as Todd's earlier classics like House Hunting or Roaming. However, it is much more expansive as those books only had about 35 images each. As we talked about before, it does have a little bit of weirdness to it, but it's not nearly as out there as some of his other books like Excerpts from a Silver Meadow. So if you're a fan of his earlier books, I'd say this is one you probably will enjoy. Something else to keep in mind, Todd's books do have a tendency of selling out, so if you're interested in it, you might want to pick up a copy sooner rather than later. So if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and if there's other books you'd be interested in seeing me review, let me know in the comments. And if you'd like to support what I'm doing here, please go ahead and check out Subjectively Objective, look through the books and magazines, find one you like and buy it. I'll be seeing you again soon.